Thanks, Pam. So sales analysis, numbers, more numbers for, to end your afternoon of numbers. So the title of this workshop has workshop actually in it, and I always think that that means that we should be doing something, like you guys should have sticks or I don't know what. But I do really want to encourage you to ask questions while I'm talking. I'm going to leave room at the end, but the way that I'm planning to go through my presentation, if you stick up your hand, hopefully I will see you and ask you, and I will be happy to answer questions while I'm talking. So before I get started, I wanted to just tell you a little bit about ECW, where I work and what we do, because of course that's where my perspective for all of this is coming from. ECW is a general trade book publisher. We're Canadian-owned. Jack David, who started ECW many years ago, almost 40 years ago, in fact, still does acquisitions and runs the company along with David Caron, who's the co-publisher. We publish a whole variety of books, so between 50 and 60 new books a year, probably. And we see them fitting into three categories that coincidentally also stand for ECW. Entertainment, culture, and writing. So entertainment books might be bios, celebrity books you'll see. We do sports books, wrestling and hockey, that kind of thing. Culture, different kinds of memoir. So next season we have a book about the waterfront of Toronto, for example, and about a woman who travels to Italy with her husband to explore their family home, in a book by the grandson of Ty Cobb. So it's a very diverse list. And then we also do literary fiction and poetry and that kind of thing. So in everything that I'm looking at all different kinds of books and different marketplaces where we might find them. How do I use numbers? Why do numbers matter? Well, the number one thing that I use sales numbers for is to make some kind of an argument, and an argument that can help me propel some kind of an action. So I'm always also looking for the story behind the numbers. So what's missing? What are we doing that's working? In terms of promotion, what are authors doing that are working? There's a whole host of things happening at any given time around what might just look like a number on a page. Key data sources, I'm just going to keep contextualizing. So the key data sources that I have access to are the ones up there. So obviously sales data from BookNet, BookScan from the US, and we also get a lot of direct from retailer weekly sales data. So that would include Baker & Taylor, Barnes & Noble, Ingram, Books A Million, Amazon. Yeah?
How do you handle your US sales?
Good question. Our US sales are through a distributor based in Chicago called IPG, Independent Publishers Group.
And do they make that available to you?
Yeah, so they get the information directly and they consolidate it for us and make it available to us. I know a lot of those retailers have portals where publishers can access the information themselves. It just so happens that we take their data feed and dump it into our own database, which I'll show you in a minute or two. And then also we get information direct from ebook retailers as well. Some of this data is actually on a more than weekly basis if we want it to be. So if we want to look in at our ebook sales to see how a certain promotion's doing, we can see it pretty much on a daily basis. All right. Oh, an example. So one of the things that I find is that it's so important to have this retailer breakdown. And even from BookNet, from sales data, we have opened up peer views where we can so that we can see the retailer breakdown. Knowing where something has sold is almost sometimes even more important than knowing the whole total number that someone of that week's purchases. So a good example is Borders. Borders no longer exists. When Borders went into bankruptcy protection, they heavily discounted the merchandise they had, and they sold a lot of books. So if we were just looking at our BookScan total number for that week for a particular title, we might think, what has this author done? What's happened? Why are so many books all of a sudden selling? And if we could see that those sales were actually all happening at Borders, which we could, we would know, okay, well, these are all discounted, so it's telling us that nothing has really changed or happened with the book. We're just selling a lot of discounted books this week from a particular vendor. Now, that happened over a period of weeks. It also helped us forecast, because we knew that a lot of Americans who like to shop at Borders were buying a lot of books kind of before the Christmas season. So probably things were going to get a little bit flat overall in the marketplace after that because people would have really loaded up on a lot of books while they were so cheap. And we did actually see that, but we were able to predict that by knowing that the sales were coming from Borders. So what I'm going to do is just go through the cycle of a book. So right from acquisitions, different stages. I kind of put marketing at the end because, of course, it's happening all throughout. And talk about how I'm using the numbers at each stage. So ECW, there's 13 people at ECW. I'm fortunate to be in a position where I'm actually working on every aspect of what we're doing with the books and giving my input and looking at numbers all through the stages. I think that probably a lot of you, people who work in publishing houses, it might sound familiar. You probably do a lot of the stuff in-house or have sort of similar approaches, but we'll see. So actually, comments are appreciated as well. If people are doing things differently or have any thoughts that aren't questions, that would be great. So acquisitions. Somebody has an idea. So that is going to be maybe from the slush pile. An author has an idea because it's their lifelong dream to write this book. Or an agent wants you to publish something, so they've sent it along to you. Maybe an acquisitions editor or your publisher sees some real potential and decides, this is a book that we're going to make work, we're going to find someone to write it. So for example, we have a book coming out about the Jays 2013 season because it looks like baseball might be interesting this fall or summer. Spring? I don't know. Jack is at spring training right now, keeping a close eye on what's happening. So that's an example where he knows there's going to be an audience for that book, and he's figured out who it's going to be and the best way to reach them. In this case, he's decided the best way to reach them is through some sports writers who are also going to be following the Jays for the whole season. Our first question when we sit down in an editorial meeting to make a decision about a book is who's going to buy the book, and do we have the means to reach them? So we use sales data to determine what the retail means are. Where are people buying this type of book? Other books that are similar. Of course, our book doesn't exist anywhere else. It's totally unique, and people are going to want it no matter what. But there are some things that are going to tell us give us a little bit of a better sense about how it's going to sell. So this is the point where we would go into look on retailer sites like Amazon and Indigo for subject searches. We would put subject searches into BookNet, sales data, and into BookScan just to see what pops up and what the numbers look like. We also kind of get a sense at this point of what formats are selling, like are these normally hardcover books, the page count, the price point. All of that is really important, but it's more just to get a sense of what's out there at this stage. We also look to see if we've had success with a similar kind of title. So do we have an expectation already that this book is going to sell well and do well because our other baseball book, if we had something that was comparable, which we don't really. If that book had done really well, where did it sell? So there are some things to keep in mind, important things to keep in mind when we're doing this kind of research. First of all, context is critical. When historical sales data is influencing our acquisitions decision, we always have to be aware of at what point in history those sales happened and what was going on. So for example, did a lot of books sell when Borders was still in business? We published some wrestling books and they happened to sell particularly well at Borders, and we've had to really work to reach that audience now that Borders doesn't exist, as an example. So we can't just immediately look back at 6 or 7 years and say, oh, this is a sure winner. Also, the marketplace has changed dramatically, right? There's less shelf space. There's other format considerations like ebooks to think about. So when things are constantly changing by retailer and format, we have to be aware of that. So we have to take the information and then extrapolate it, whatever we think is going to be useful. In terms of market share, historical data is really important within context to tell us what worked for different market channels. And then we can extrapolate from there based on the percentage of market share for our titles. I think this is interesting too because we spend probably a lot of time looking at our overall market share. But if we break it down by kind of book, like each book is going to have its own unique great sales spot. So let's say that's online, or maybe it's mass merch or whatever. So I created some pie charts, and they're interesting. I'll tell you this before I show them to you. They're interesting to me because It doesn't really matter what the market channel is. What's interesting to me is there's 6 different kinds of books, and if I flip through, then you'll just see how hugely different each one of those is. So nothing looks totally the same. So if I go back, I'll do it a little bit slower. So a US fiction title that seems to be selling pretty well in the chain and in US wholesalers. Canadian fiction, where we see Canadian chain taking a big chunk of it. So some of these things are more obvious and what you would expect. Sports titles, where things are selling more online. Are all books selling mostly online, or are things moving around? Well, we see that there's no true answer for any one particular kind of book. So, what this really means to us is that every kind of information we can gather that is as specific as possible is going to be the most relevant to making our acquisitions decision. So we're trying to drill down as much as we can. However, ultimately, at this stage, especially above everything else, it's so important, I think, that editors are driven by the projects they're convinced are really great, and that editors think that we have an audience that we can reach. So we all work together to determine if that is true before we move on. So sales prep and sell-in. So here's the polar bear out in the wilderness. So now we have to look at a different kind of comparable title and different kind of information when we're getting ready to actually tell our sales reps about this book and get them out there starting to sell it. So, for example, we've already done all this work looking up comp titles, right? Why can't we just dump those onto our tip sheet? Well, we can't, because what if those comp titles are books that came out maybe 7 or 8 years ago? Totally not relevant anymore to the buyers that are going to be looking at the books. We have to find stuff that's more recent. We've probably been looking at comps that are pretty much exactly the same subject as the book that we're about to publish. If there truly is nothing else out there like it, we probably haven't spent a lot of time looking at them. But at this point, there are always books that are going to be comparable. So my students always come up with their own book projects, and sometimes they give me their TI sheets with no comp titles, and they say, well, there is nothing else like this. And I say, that is impossible. Go back and try again. But we're looking really specifically at this point at format and price point. So if we're planning on a hardcover book that's $32.95, we're not going to put mass market comps on our TI sheet. That's not useful. We want to look for books that have similar sales expectations to ours. So it's well and good to see that something is selling 200,000 copies, but if our sales expectation is 2,000 copies, that is not a good comp. So just because a buyer is going to automatically know Miriam Taves, maybe she's not the best example for every fiction book that is coming out in this season. We spend a lot of time at this stage on price point and looking at sell-through, because we really want to price our books right for the market, right for the people that are going to buy them. So we do that mostly looking at comps. So then we can go to our Barnes & Noble rep, who's always getting after us about just a slightly lower price to get more copies of the book in. And we can say, well, we know that all of the other books like this are selling at this price, and they're selling this many copies, and they're doing okay. So we come prepared with our arguments, and that also means that our rep doesn't have to go do that work for himself in too much detail. We price our books also for the marketplace. So we don't want to put two prices on the back of our books that are too different. So even if we know the Canadian market could maybe bear $24.95 paperback, we know that it has to be $19.95 in the US. And we also know that we can't print $24.95, $19.95 on the back of a book and not have our readers get angry with us. So we do tend to price everything at par, and we tend to decide, where is this book going to sell more copies? Is it going to be in the US, or is it going to be in Canada? Where are we going to be doing most of our marketing efforts? And from that, we'll fix on the best price for a book. And then we can say, when someone says $18.95, that's way too much for a paperback fiction title, we can say, well, you know what, this is for the Canadian market, don't worry about it, to our US reps. Or in Canada, they might say, oh, it could be a bit higher, and we say, well, we want to actually make it a little bit possible in the US. So we try to find a happy medium as much as we can. We also do, at this time, some marketing planning around sell-in. So let's say that we finished all of our sales prep, and now it's sell-in time. So at this point, we really want to be watching quantity on order. to see what's coming in, what kind of projections we're getting for certain titles, and taking the opportunity to plan our marketing around that as much as possible. So let's say Indigo is taking a really large quantity of a book for a certain time span. We want to be 100% aware that those books are going into the store at that time so that we can drive our efforts towards ways to get people into the store to actually buy those books. Or if we think someone has placed an order that's high and we're happy about that, but we feel like we need to make additional efforts to really sell them, at that point we'll start thinking about it. Yeah. Yeah.
Are you doing that marketing and watching the advances? This is post-sales conference, or do you do pre-sales, or what's your cycle for informing your salespeople?
Okay, so yeah, I kind of went through pre-sales, sales conference, sort of right after, all in one big hunk there. So for our first step would be pre-sales, and that's where we're having big conversations about the format and the price point. And we also spend a lot of time at that stage looking at the book cover, so figuring out if the cover is right for the market as well, which does not have to do with the sales analysis, although it kind of does because it will sell more copies if the cover is right. So that's the pre-sales, and we sort of go back from that, and we spend even more time determining what our final price point is going to be based on the feedback that we get from our reps at that time. So we've done a ton of research to prepare for that pre-sales meeting, so we can be really informed with like lots of numbers and examples when we go into it. Sales conference happens, but even before sales conference now, just the way the timing works out, a lot of stuff is being sold into accounts 6 months or more ahead of time. So we might already have projections at that time for what's going to happen. So at sales conference, we have a better sense of what's going to be getting out there in some accounts in bigger numbers, and that might help drive the indie sales up a bit, which I'll talk about when I talk about gap analysis, but often using some already positive feedback to help build more sales at the sales conference time. So then projections happen around then and maybe a little bit after, and then we start seeing orders come in, unfortunately, usually not more than 2 months before the pub date, but sometimes it's even closer, so being mindful of that. Okay, so print run. How many books do we actually need? So now we have all these projections. We have maybe, as I just mentioned, some orders, but probably not everything that we're expecting. So you have to kind of cross our fingers and hope that we're going to have the orders that we expect at this point. But of course, there's another kink in it, which is ebooks. Yes, the cat is the ebook. So now we're not just thinking about filling our warehouse with all these printed books, we're also thinking, well, how many people do we think are going to choose this other electronic format where we can create one file and have as many as we want? It's genius. So we have to weigh all of these things, and again, we're looking, especially for ebooks, mostly at our own historical data to make a decision about what kind of book we think is going to sell more like an ebook. Although we do have some stuff on our list now where that is already a built-in expectation that we think that people are really going to want to use this book on a tablet or something else. So we make adjustments that way. But really, what we're focused on is being really nimble at this point. So again, we spend a lot of time deciding on what the print run of a particular book is going to be. So our production team gets quotes, and then our co-publishers, Jack and David, and I sit down and we look at those and we look at the projections, and then we look back at a whole bunch of different elements of historical data. So if it's a book by someone that we've published before, so let's say it's the 5th book in a mystery series, we have a pretty good sense by now of what that author generally does. And what we're looking at is the most number of books that were out in the marketplace at any time. So we're not actually really looking at what ended up selling, but how many copies we needed to keep up with the demand. Because we want our books to be in stores, so we want to be able to get them out there. So even if we might need more than we're ultimately going to sell, of course, because people aren't generally selling through 100% of their books and just walking away from it happily, hopefully. We look at that number, but we also look at it over genre, so maybe if it's not the same author, but it's a kind of similar kind of book, we can take a look and see what the max number was. What else was I going to say about that? I think that's about it. Questions about print runs? Some of the orders don't even come in until after the book has gone to the printer, and then we have to readjust. Generally, we are being pretty conservative with our print runs because we have the ability to reprint stuff pretty quickly, and because we have all of the sell-through information, we can see how something's doing and where it's selling and where we need to have books, and we can make a decision to like print 100 quickly or to do another offset run or whatever. Things that we find are expensive or having like spot UV covers or something and doing a short run. So we started just recently printing cover overruns so we can make digital decisions quickly. So we kind of are anticipating that we probably will print a smaller quantity later if we need it, but we don't do it right at the outset. So this sales date onwards, this is where we really start getting actionable reports, and we can really review what's happening with the numbers on a weekly basis in a lot of detail, and it's going to help us make a lot of decisions. We use a FileMaker database, and we're very lucky that David is a FileMaker genius and has created a really robust system for us to use in-house. So all of the reports that we get from our distributor in a spreadsheet, we just dump into a file and create something that looks pretty much like this. So this would be 1 week's worth of data, and it's only, it's not even a whole screen, right? So it's going on, off the page for different vendors. But this would be really just looking at the raw data. So down the side would be just a list of titles that I sort of kind of blurred out. It is just a snapshot in time. So, and we're looking at the first column is sell-through, and the second column is on hand for all of them. So we pull that information in for all of our vendors. And this is great. It's great to have a data collection, like a data point to collect all this, and it's nice to look at it and scan down. But what's more interesting is keeping your data in some kind of a system where you can ask it a question and it will give you the answer that you want. And you have to know what answer you're looking for in order to be able to ask the right question. So we've developed a lot of scripts within our database to look stuff up, and we can pull information off. So this next screen is just showing one title historically. So at the very top in the box that says Canada, you can see sold last 8 weeks and current on hand. This is just some random backlist title. We can see that we printed it a couple of times, basically 1,000 copies each time. We can see the US besides, so we can see the 8 weeks US, and we can see what's actually on hand in our warehouse. So we're seeing what's on hand in the warehouse and also in the marketplace. And then also internationally, because we also have distribution arrangements in the UK and in Australia that we're dealing with. We want to see if they have stock on backorder and what their position is roughly. But they're just not selling as many books for us, obviously, as Canada and the US, so it's more of a secondary as needed kind of thing. So down the side, we can see monthly totals. So if this book had come out in 2011, we would see more numbers filling in the sides. So you can see a quick glance monthly, and then the top box is sell-through, and it's by format, so ebook sell-through, looking at a few key vendors, and then on hand in the marketplace again. So we can easily from this, I didn't put this in the presentation, but the way our database is set up, I could run a quick script that would tell me the sell-through, the weekly sell-through versus on hand, and would immediately give me the weeks of supply. So that's really important. That's something to look at to see, does this retailer actually have enough books for what they're selling, and do we need to remind them? So in most cases, most retailers are looking at these numbers as well and flagging stuff and have algorithms built in. But the human element here, this is where it really comes in, is really important, because we might know that we have a great promotion coming and that they don't have enough books. A retailer is not going to have that level of insight into our company. We can also see where things are really up or really down. We even actually use those words in our script, really up. So something great is happening, or where the sell-through is just like in the toilet, and why is that, and is there something that we can do to remedy it? So we can look at the actions, again, all the time. The big thing here at this point is really gap analysis, which sounds like so much fun, and it is. So I'm generally looking at gaps in 3 different ways. So the first one is between accounts. So is one account selling something really well and another one just isn't. And is there a reason for that? Is it just a stock issue? Because then maybe we can make the argument, obviously not sharing any proprietary data, but make the argument that book is doing really well in one spot and not doing well in another. And this actually is something for ebooks in particular that we're seeing. I think a lot of it has to do with different, the kinds of books people who use different devices want. I think that's definitely part of it. But if we see a book that's taking off in ebook format in one vendor and not in another, we want to flag that because we think there could be some potential. Between territories, so our Taylor Swift book from a few years ago was a good example of this. So Taylor Swift, super popular, right? But at this time, the buyers just weren't really getting it. This was probably 2 years ago, I guess. So they took our Taylor Swift book in really tiny quantities. But then one large bookseller in Canada, started to see that it was working, so brought in more and more copies. And we could see the sales numbers just grow and grow and grow. So we wanted to go to US booksellers of a similar size and say, Taylor Swift is even more popular in the US. It would be great if you could bring some more books in. And then between formats, so this is really interesting now to me, because if something takes off in a really good way and a bookstore runs out, the ebook is going to be available and it's probably going to keep selling more. This book, Chai Tea Sunday, a first novel, we had a nice confluence of events where the author was on Canada AM, it was Victoria Day weekend, we were promoting the ebook, and sales went crazy, and the bookstores just didn't have the stock on hand, nor did they have the flexibility to be able to take that book and move it to the front of the store over Victoria Day long weekend. But we wanted to say to them after the fact, the ebook is selling really well. Now's a good opportunity to know people really want this book. Let's think about bringing some more copies in. So that's a really simplistic, I think, overview of gap analysis. You can look at the gaps in all different ways, but we're constantly trying to find a place where we can put more books. But we have to remember that it's not just about data, it's about people and different kinds of stores. So we're not talking about toothpaste. So just because it's selling really well, a book is selling really well at Costco, that does not necessarily mean it's going to sell well everywhere else. It has certain placement, it's there for a certain audience, it has a very particular price point, and sometimes we have to accept that something is going to do well in one place and maybe not in another, and that's okay. So we have to be mindful of all these things when we're approaching retailers. And actually, to be fair, our sales reps are doing all of that work anyway, so maybe they just say, oh, Erin, not again, delete our email. I don't think that's true. All right. So now, Taylor Swift, right? I was going to give another example that I skipped right over. Look at that, it's a different Taylor Swift cover. So another thing that comes of this is realizing that there is a lot of market potential for something and you just want to try again. So when a book is a little bit old, some stores are not going to want to bring it in as though it's a new book. So we can use our numbers from the first book. Great, it actually worked. It sold really well. We're happy with it, but it could do better. Could we maybe try to get it into some big mass merch in the U.S. if we repackage it? So that's what we're doing right now. It looks like the new Taylor Swift album. There's a lot of new content at the end, but we're really using our argument here is using the numbers from the first book and the success and her audience and all this stuff, but to try to resell a book based on what we figured out when the first book was selling. So we'll see how it goes. We have some good orders in the pipeline right now. All right, so then reprints. So just because your warehouse might be empty, like the sad warehouse is, does that necessarily mean that we need to reprint the book, that we need more? And maybe we even have a lot of back orders, but does that mean that we need to reprint the book? So again, we're really delving into that retailer-specific data to make a decision. What is their current weeks of supply? Do they actually have enough books to keep filling orders, but it's selling well, so they want more? Generally, we want retailers to have as many books as they want on their shelves, but if we don't have any left, are we going to invest in reprinting more when we can see that we're going to get returns from that same vendor in a little while? That happens sometimes. If the book is mostly selling online, let's say, and we can see that our online vendors are well stocked, we'll probably not make a decision to hit the reprint button. right away. We also look at week-over-week back orders to see how something is progressing. If a big number pops up, we want to see who is it for. Is it maybe a course adoption or something where we can just print 30 copies for somebody? But running out of books or getting low on a quantity of books does not a reprint decision make. And more often than not, we're in a situation, so this is a chart that we look at for reprints. We're in a situation where if it doesn't say inventory is beside it, that means they're back orders. So there's some books, and this sheet is from a couple weeks ago. There's some titles in here where we see like 100 back orders that have been building week over week. And we can see on this chart as well, sort of at the end there, 12 months sales, so what we've actually shipped in the past 12 months, and also what the past year's sell-through has been. So we know how well the title is generally performing. So for example, if our sales and our sell-through are kind of the same number, the decision to reprint is going to be pretty fast and pretty easy. We know that what we're putting out there, people are buying, so we can safely assume that we're going to print books and people are going to actually want them. But you know, if there's a big gap, well, we have to consider what's still out there in the marketplace and whether or not we need to. So this is showing a couple titles at the top where we made a decision to reprint them and what the print run would be. And then Soons, so those are the titles that we're constantly monitoring. So we're pulling this comes from exactly the same data set, the same database that I showed earlier, but we're just pulling a script that's bringing the data in this combination so that we can look at it and see soon. So it's automatically going to flag stuff for us where we're low based on sales and sell-through. So even if we had 5 copies of something left and it's selling through like 1 copy a year, it's not going to pop up on here because we know that number is okay. So every number is working with every other number. Are there questions about reprints or this?
Sorry,
Yes.
The only one who wants to ask a question.
It's fine, Judy.
On your reprints, turnaround time?
Oh, okay. So it depends if it's an offset or a digital reprint. And that's a really good lead-in into the next point that I was going to make, which is that our distributor now has things set up where they will automatically digitally reprint something if they see that we're running out of books. We choose not to take advantage of that because, again, we have more information than they do. So we know if an author has something coming up. So maybe we actually need 50 books and not 10, and it's going to cost us more to print 40 and another 10, right? So we want to be on top of making those decisions. So our turnaround time for a digital run could be like a week, maybe, a week and a half. We have a good, sometimes a bit more, like no more than 2 weeks though, probably. Our distributor works with a printer that's like practically right next door to them, so we can eliminate a lot of shipping time. For offset, it's as offset runs would be, so probably 3 weeks at the minimum, unless we're trying to get something done really fast. All right. So this is my marketing slide. So sharing the information. So there's a couple of things to think about here. We have marketing, publicity people in our office, as I think all publishing companies have someone who has these tasks assigned to them. So how is our information shared across a company? I always find it interesting to hear from my colleagues and friends what sort of access to information they have within their company. At ECW, everyone has access to all of the information, really. They can open up the database at any time and take a look at it. And there are particular scripts maybe that people run to get the information that they need. Probably they like to look at like overviews, maybe book scan, and sales data numbers every week. We used to send a weekly sell-through update around, and this stopped a while ago, probably about maybe a year and a half ago, when people got access to more information, and we started relying pretty heavily on the feeds from our distributor. But we used to send around a sheet every week, and then that sheet came with a commentary that usually I would write and would make reflections on successes, why something might have done well that week, why it's kind of low, some sort of action. So we did this for quite a while, and I think it was a good thing to do, and we stopped doing it for no good reason except for probably time and the different ways now that we've created for people to access the information. So one of these that we've just created, I'm very excited about this, is inside our publicity tracking, a publicity tracking screen that we have right at the top. So we're keeping track on that in this view in our database. Publicists are keeping track of media hits, what the intended audience was, that kind of thing. But at the very top of that, we keep all of our sales, our key sales data numbers in a week-over-week way. So they can immediately see what's on hand in major vendors and what's sold through the last week. And they can also see how many copies our distributors in the UK and in Australia have as well. So if they're sometimes getting requests or have questions about that, it's right at the top of the screen. But we look at this in our publicity and marketing meetings every other week. And when we look at what actions we're taking and how we need to replan our strategy through the season, we're actually seeing those numbers right at the same time attached to the title. And I think that this approach is new for us, but I think it is going to actually change a little bit what direction we have and how we're looking at the results through the season when it actually counts, because the books are actually on the store shelves right then, so we can maybe affect some change. Stock on hand, really important to look at. It also influences investments we might not have planned for that we might want to make. So like a last minute ad comes along. Do we want to spend money on it? Well, maybe it's for like next week and it's a nice idea, but there aren't any books out in stores right now. So we're probably not going to spend money on something when we don't think that people are going to have a means to go out and buy it right away, unless it's driving to a particular place, maybe like online or something like that. Right before Christmas, we had a book that was doing well. It was out in stores in good numbers, but we didn't have a lot of extra books in the warehouse. And the author had a famous publicist friend who wanted to, a famous publicist? Anyway. Someone who worked for a pretty ritzy publicity firm in New York, who was volunteering to help out a little bit and at a reduced rate. So great idea, but we didn't really have enough books in that moment to ship him a ton to send out to people. Basically, we had to decide based on what was in the marketplace, again, and what was in our warehouse, if we were going to invest money in doing a big, huge extra publicity push at that time, or if we wanted to actually wait until we thought we could take more advantage of it just because we had more books available to us. Unless you're ever doing only one thing for a particular book, it's really difficult to see if something in particular, what in particular really drove the sales. But there are indications in there, right? And this is when we started having access to sales data years ago. This is one of the big things that we really wanted to focus on. And it's something that BookNet does a really good job of preparing reports on how different like different kinds of TV shows or media outlets might work. So if you haven't seen those, you should look at those reports. We're not the kind of company that puts reference codes, like reference promo codes on our ads or anything like that. So we don't necessarily know what pushed someone to buy a book specifically. But again, we can look at a combination of things and say something was a success. And then if it continues and only one of those elements remains, we can say, oh, this was really a success. So the Chai Tea Sunday Victoria Day Long Weekend example is great. So the author was on Canada AM, but she had a way bigger sales boost than other authors that we've had on Canada AM have had, probably because we were promoting the title right then. But then the title became more visible, and people kept buying it. So she wasn't on Canada AM every week. Not everybody in Canada saw her on that show in that particular time, but a lot of people continue to buy the book and still do when it becomes visible to them through a particular outlet. So we see that in the sell-through numbers, and then we adjust ourselves based on that. And we try to replicate things as much as we can because sometimes what the numbers tell us is serendipity. And that's great, but we like to try to plan for serendipity. So or we can also see how well merchandising works. And we can see that pretty specifically all the time in our numbers. So we know that if something is out on tables and people are buying it, that's because they're seeing it on those tables. And for our company in particular, merchandising works really well. Visibility sells books. We aim for it. We know that. We have the numbers to back up why we want to invest in it. We know roughly how much money we want to spend on merchandising because we know what the results are going to be and what we can afford. And that's all because we have retailer breakdown sales data that comes in a moment. So again, we can react quickly because of that. We don't have to wait for our month-end sales reports from our distributor. Another great thing that data leads to is bestseller lists. So in Canada, we submit all of our direct sales to sales data, so it can get into the pile of contenders for the Canadian bestseller lists. This past fall, it was the first time, September 23rd, look at that, the first time that we had a book ever on the New York Times bestseller list, which I thought was, it was really exciting to get a book on that list, but also the amount of work that we put into it was actually also quite staggering. So we knew where the numbers, what retailers were reporting. The author had an event the weekend before the release, or like the week of the release, I guess, and was going to sell a lot of copies. So we made sure that we were working with a bookseller that had agreed to give his numbers to the New York Times. We had to build a lot of buzz, even with the New York Times, so that they would notice that the book was coming out and be interested in it. What else did we do? We spent a lot of time on collecting pre-orders, so particularly with Amazon.com. In this case, it was in the US. So we created some contests and pushed people to pre-order. So we knew that we were going to have a big whack of books going out right in that moment. And then as soon as they did, we had to tell the New York Times again, this is happening, look out for it. So we were really on top of making this happen. And we learned a lot of stuff about bestseller lists in the US market. We knew a lot about the Canadian market already, but not so much about the US. So it was a good learning experience for us, and you know, once something is there, then they'll keep paying attention to it, and you don't have to keep sending them. We would email our book scan numbers to them. Like, they can see the book scan numbers. They're not a secret, but they might not be looking for your particular title. So that was an interesting marketing experiment. All right, so this is my other things to ponder. So some just general questions about data and the future of it and what else we might want to see. Real-time data, this is a question. I was on a panel for Tech Forum West a couple of years ago, and it was a question that came up. Are you interested in real-time data? This clock is backwards for a reason. I am not interested in real-time data. Personally, I think that it would be too much. Daily is great, and from some vendors, but realistically, we're mostly working with weekly data, and that's a function of what we have time for. So I think that other people who have a more focus on looking at maybe a particular account or something, they'd probably love to have real-time data. I just don't want it. The only thing that I would love is inventory receipts in a more real-time way. So we see when stuff hits our distributor's warehouse, like, eventually, but the next day if it gets there, unless we're like emailing them every 5 minutes to say, are our books there yet? So with a warehouse, but also with vendors. So sometimes stock is in transit and we don't really know where it is. I wish you get a little, whoop, your order arrived, and it would save so much time. It would be terrific. So that's what I would like. What about authors and authors' access to data? So authors like to spend a lot of time, if only Ryan Gosling was an ECW author. Authors like to spend a lot of time looking at sales rankings and looking for whatever sales information they can find. And what an author can find on the internet might not necessarily be accurate, and it's probably definitely not going to be in context. So it might not indicate what's happening with their title, but it does make them think that they know what's happening with their title and make them send you angry notes, possibly, or, you know, like notes that my Amazon ranking went up 5 spots or whatever, things like that, which is great. I think it's great when authors are really engaging with what's happening with the numbers. We like to share as much as we're super transparent, so we'll share as much information with our authors as they ask for. I usually encourage authors to wait a few weeks when their book comes out initially, because it might be kind of disappointing to see sometimes when things get into stores slower. But I'm happy to give them monthly updates on what's happening with their sales. And I explain to them, I tell them what we've sold in, so they know where the effort is. They know where their books are. So if they want to go out and sign books in their neighborhood or something like that, they will have a sense of if there are books there at their local, Indigo store or wherever they are. And then I give them sell-through too, and I explain what the difference is. So, we want to be positive about what's happening with the book, but we want to be realistic about what people are actually buying and how it's doing, because you don't want someone to get their royalty report 12 months down the road and say, well, Erin told me my book sold 5,000 copies in September, so what happened? Why is my royalty report for 50 books? Hopefully that doesn't happen too much. Sort of to end off, where we've been and where we're going, that's the next thing. I think sales success happens a really long time after sell-in, and there's a lot of stuff that we can't predict. There's a combination of so many factors, and lots of that stuff we can't really do anything about. So a good positive example is we might not know that a book is going to get course adopted for the next 25 years when we acquire it. And that's a huge success for us, and that's something that we can count on and predict over and over again for that particular title. But we don't know that going out of the gate. Often going out of the gate, we don't know if a book is going to get an excellent review in Library Journal, and all of a sudden our wholesaler orders are going to shoot up, and we're going to have to immediately ship off a bunch of books that aren't going to be returnable. That's a happy thing, but we can't anticipate that someone is going to love the book when we send it to the printer, which is why we have to be really flexible and know that if that happens, we're probably going to have to reprint the book and ship more copies out. We can't do anything about what's happening in the world around us. So there was a hockey strike this fall, and we had some hockey books, and nobody wanted to talk about them in the media. And it was a real challenge to try to sell them. Now, one of the books is about the Summit series, which, to be fair, was talked about in the media, and that book did okay. But the other book was about the Washington Capitals, who, first of all, when the book was at the printer, did not win the Stanley Cup. And then, but they have a great fan base, so that's okay. We weren't publishing the book counting on them to win the Stanley Cup. Huge fan base, but the fan base was just not engaged in hockey when we were actually had the books in stores trying to sell it. So now we are trying to reboot that book a bit, but it's challenging, right? So we don't know when those things are going to happen and what it will lead to. So yeah, things depend entirely on the book itself. Again, I have in my notes, books, not toothpaste. So we have to be mindful of everything that's happening around them in order to be able to use all of the great data that we have effectively. Okay, thanks.